The scandalous truth about the Soviet Tu-144 supersonic disaster that was hidden for 52 years. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button so you receive notifications about new videos. This way, YouTube's algorithms will see that you're interested in my content and will start recommending it. This means the channel will continue operating and new videos will be released regularly. Thank you in advance for your support. On June 3, 1973, residents of the small French town of Goussainville heard an unusual rumble that echoed off the houses. Looking up at the sky, they saw a giant aircraft of unusual shape flying at high speed over residential areas. Suddenly, the plane entered dive and began approaching the ground. What followed was a real nightmare for the city's inhabitants. Before their eyes, the giant aircraft began breaking apart in midair before crashing down. The force of impact was so powerful that aircraft debris was scattered across vast territories. The disaster completely destroyed 5 houses and damaged another 20. 8 people died on the ground, with 25 suffering serious injuries. The aircraft crew, consisting of 6 people, also perished in a terrible aviation disaster. Soon, the crash site was cordoned off by police. Employees of the General Directorate of Internal Security worked at the scene. That day, 20 kilometers from Paris, a Soviet supersonic passenger aircraft Tu-144 had crashed. This was one of the most mysterious disasters in aviation history. Investigation materials were not made public, and the circumstances of the disaster remain classified to this day. After World War II, scientific and technological progress was observed worldwide. Leading powers were engaged in space exploration, creating rockets capable of overcoming Earth's gravitational pull and launching artificial Earth satellites. Great successes were observed in atomic energy. Industrial reactors and nuclear power plants were being developed. Work was underway to create electronic computing machines. The scientific technical revolution also affected aviation technologies. In 1949, the world's first commercial jet airliner, developed by a British aircraft manufacturing company, took to the skies. Its commercial operation began in 1952. In 1956, the Soviet Union introduced the Tu-104 passenger jet aircraft into commercial service. 3 years later, commercial flights of the 4-engine Boeing 707 passenger jet began in the United States. However, aircraft designers were tasked with increasing the speed of jet passenger aircraft, so they would be capable of developing speed higher than the speed of sound. On November 5, 1956, a committee for supersonic transport aircraft was created in Great Britain, which later combined its developments with the French aircraft manufacturing company Sud Aviation, resulting in the British-French supersonic passenger aircraft project Concorde. At the same time, in the Soviet Union, the Tupolev Design Bureau was developing the first-class supersonic passenger aircraft Tu-144. The beginning of this project was marred by a scandal in the Design Bureau. General designer Andrei Tupolev stated that due to his age, it would be difficult for him to lead such a large-scale and ambitious project. As the lead designer, he proposed the candidacy of his son, Alexei Tupolev. This caused an extremely negative reaction from his first deputy, Leonid Kerber, who openly told Tupolev that his son was a good person, a decent designer, but a very weak leader, and such a complex and ambiguous project will be beyond his capabilities. However, Tupolev insisted on his decision. Consequently, the deputy general designer, Dr. Technical Sciences Leonid Kerber, wrote a resignation letter. Subsequently, he gave lectures on aircraft equipment to students at MAI Moscow Aviation Institute. During work on the supersonic passenger aircraft, Soviet and British-French aircraft designers encountered a mass of problems. Such machines produce excessive noise generation during takeoff, as well as sonic booms during flight. Moreover, a huge budget was required for project development and elimination of all defects, as well as the production of expensive structural materials. On top of everything else, supersonic aircraft had enormous fuel consumption. The first test of the Tu-144 showed that at the enormous speed of 2,300 kilometers per hour, the windows, unable to withstand the pressure, were destroyed. It was then decided to use special heat-resistant alloys. and the windows were made from heat-resistant quartz-containing organic glass. During flight, some parts of the airliner heated up due to air friction, resulting in thermal expansion effects. Intermolecular distances increased, and the aircraft fuselage lengthened by 25 centimeters. The flight altitude in supersonic cruise mode was 15,000 meters, with a ceiling of 19,000 meters. Gold coating had to be applied to the windows, which protected passengers from solar radiation in the stratosphere. The supersonic aircraft literally terrorized navigation services. Such a machine could not fly along ordinary air routes. Its flight trajectory was parabolic. Using up fuel, the Tu-144 climbed to an altitude of 16,000 meters, leaving subsonic aircraft routes below, then gradually descended. Moreover, not every Soviet airport was capable of receiving this liner. The runway had to be at least 4 kilometers long with perfectly smooth and durable surface. Specifically for the Tu-144, they developed the NK-144 afterburning turbojet engine. The gas temperature at the afterburner exit was 600 degrees Celsius. To protect the rear part of the fuselage from high temperatures, it was made from titanium and stainless steel. The first flight of the Tu-144 took place on December 31st, 1968. The aircraft was piloted by test pilot Eduard Ilyin. From 1975, the supersonic passenger aircraft began operating commercial flights on the Moscow-Mata route. 2 years before this, the first supersonic passenger aircraft disaster in history occurred. On June 3, 1973, the Soviet airliner Tu-144 was participating in the 30th International Paris Air Show at Le Bourget. That day, the crew was to perform another demonstration flight. The crew consisted of 6 people: Aircraft Commander Mikhail Kozlov, Second Pilot Valery Mochinov, Navigator Georgy Bazanov, Flight Engineer Anatoly Dralin, Deputy General Designer Vladimir Benderov, and Lead Test Engineer Boris Pervukin. Before departure, French journalists approached the Soviet crew and asked to take a person with a camera on board who would film a report about the pilot's work. However, the cabin volume did not allow placing another person there. The French journalists were refused. However, Deputy General Designer Vladimir Benderov suggested to the French that they give him a camera so he could film the crew's work during flight. The journalists gave him a Boyu camera. At 15:19, the Tu-144 took off from Le Bourget Airport. After performing several maneuvers, it executed a low-speed flight with landing gear and canards extended. Then the Tu-144 began gaining altitude. The engine afterburners engaged. The landing gear and canards were retracted. At 15:29, the aircraft unexpectedly began entering a dive. The crew tried to pull the Tu-144 out of the negative pitch attitude. However, due to overloads, the liner's fuselage began breaking apart in the air. Debris from the Soviet supersonic aircraft crashed into the residential quarter of Gussenville. The entire crew, as well as 8 city residents, perished. A Soviet-French commission was created to investigate the aviation disaster. Experts determined that the emergency magnetic recorder was completely destroyed. The commission then collected amateur footage of the Tu-144's final flight and, carefully studying the collected airliner debris, made their conclusion. Music, all aircraft systems were functioning properly. There was no engine failure. No signs of sabotage, fire, or explosion were established. The airliner was destroyed due to extreme overloads when the crew was pulling it out of the dive. According to the commission, events could have developed as follows. During the flight, a French Mirage 3 fighter approached the Tu-144 at a safe distance, which was filming the Soviet aircraft. This was unexpected for the Tu-144 crew. Despite the safe distance, the Tu-144 attempted to perform a maneuver to evade. At this time, Benderov was filming the pilot's work and was not strapped in. As a result of the maneuver, he lost balance and caused temporary blocking of the crew's work, consequently resulting in the aviation disaster. Despite the fact that this hypothesis had no full evidentiary base, the Soviet and French commissions decided to settle on this version. It was officially announced that determining the cause of the aviation disaster was not possible. The case was closed. Such a formulation raised many questions among colleagues and relatives of the deceased pilots. They tried to obtain more detailed information. However, the case was classified as secret. Access to it was closed. Many pilots who knew Mikhail Kozlov well refused to believe that such an experienced pilot would perform a dangerous maneuver that ended in the crew's death. Even if the French fighter really made a dangerous approach, it was unlikely that Mikhail Kozlov would avoid a collision by diving, especially at low altitude. Mikhail's colleagues believed that the dive was most likely unexpected for crew, and the pilots simply didn't have time to recover from it. Why the airliner entered dive mode remained a mystery. What follows are the recollections of Edgar Krupiansky, a leading flight test engineer who prepared the Tu-144 for demonstration flights at Le Bourget in 1973. Edgar Fedorovic recalled that on the evening of June 2nd, he returned to the hotel. Near one of the rooms, he heard a loud conversation between the deputy general designer and test pilot Eduard Ilyin. The conversation was conducted in raised tones. Krupiansky stopped and opened the door of the hotel room where the lively discussion was taking place. Besides Benderov and Ilyin, the entire Tu-144 crew was there. When Krupiansky entered the room, the conversation broke off. Everyone fell silent. An awkward pause ensued, understanding that he had become some kind of unwanted witness to the conversation. Krupiansky apologized and left. The next day, according to the same Edgar Fedorovic's recollections, he completed all work preparing the Tu-144 for demonstration flights. At 15:19, the Soviet supersonic liner took to the sky. After completing the planned pass over runway 30, the Tu-144 should have been approaching for landing. However, to Krupiansky's surprise, the liner went for another pass that was not planned. Krupiansky approached the head of the Ministry of Aviation Industry Flight Service, Oleg Belostoyky, and said, "Oleg Ivanovich, this is an unplanned pass. It seems the crew made a mistake. Maybe give command to land." However, Belostoyky, without taking his eyes off the flying Tu-144, quietly said, "Everything's normal, don't worry." A few minutes later, the airliner crashed. Ilyin ran up to Belostoyky. He was in a panic. With eyes full of horror, he screamed, "Oleg, what have they done? What have they done?" The next morning, Krupiansky, along with other experts, was sent to the crash site. They had to collect fuel residues, hydraulic fluid, and engine oil for subsequent analysis and study. Examining the cabin, experts noticed that Molchanov was strapped to his seat across the shoulder. This is usually done to perform complex aerobatic figures. Dralin and Provokin were thrown from the cabin in the air during the aircraft's destruction. Their bodies were found in the city near residential buildings. Then they began searching for the emergency recorder. A day later, searchers noticed a small private house with a fresh round dent on its wall. Examining the area near the house, they discovered a damaged fragment of the recorder's tape mechanism. This meant the emergency recorder was completely destroyed. Soviet searchers noticed a large garbage can standing on the property. Checking it, they found a deformed cassette from the emergency recorder. Apparently, the house owner, cleaning up the area after the fallen debris, threw it away, considering it useless trash. Soviet experts were accompanied by French police. Now they needed to somehow transfer the valuable cassette to the Soviet Commission without attracting police attention. The searchers resorted to a small trick. All found debris was stored in two piles. One contained fragments of interest for further analysis. The second contained various small items. Soviet specialists placed the found cassette in the second pile. Sometime later, one of the designers, without attracting attention, picked it up, after which the cassette was taken to Moscow. In the official investigation, the emergency recorder tape was listed as not found. Soon all aircraft fragments were delivered to Moscow on an In-22. They were placed in one of the hangars on a special wooden mock-up copy of the Tu-144 aircraft. At the same time, decryption of the emergency recorder tape began. For many years, French, British, and Soviet journalists tried to determine the real cause of the aviation disaster. Various versions were expressed, which boiled down to the fact that the Soviet crew inadequately reacted to the appearance of the French fighter filming the Tu-144, resulting in the disaster. Sometime later, an independent investigation was begun by a team of experts including Valentin Ivanovich Bliznik, chief designer of the Tu-160 supersonic bomber, Leonid Evgenevich Vasiliev, specialist in applied aerodynamics, Vladimir Mihailovich Vol, head of the engine division of ANTK named after Tupolev, Valentin Tikhonovich Klimov, general director of ANTK named after Tupolev, Arseny Dmitrievich Mironov, doctor of technical sciences, sonic boom expert, Alexei Andreevich Tupolev, chief, designer of Tu-123 and Tu-144 aircraft, Yuri Nikolayevich Popov, deputy chief designer for the Tu-144 aircraft, Alexander Leonidovich Pukov, director of supersonic advanced aircraft programs at NTK named after Tupolev, and Georgy Alexeyevich Chermyukin, head of the aerodynamics division of NTK named after Tupolev. They published their independent investigation in the book, The Truth About Supersonic Passenger Aircraft. The disaster Tu-144 aircraft, tail number 77102 in Paris. After decrypting the tape, all participants signed a non-disclosure agreement. However, many years later, some specialists, including Krupiansky, revealed some circumstances of this disaster. According to the recording from the Tu-144's emergency recorder, after performing a zoom climb, an aerobatic figure in which the aircraft gains altitude at a constant trajectory angle. The canards were retracted, the elevons deflected for a dive. The pilots tried to correct the trajectory by pulling the control stick toward themselves, after which the aircraft commander gave the order to deploy the canards. The Tu-144 began experiencing extreme overloads, consequently breaking apart in the air. The secret commission concluded that the cause of such aircraft behavior was the unplanned activation of an experimental signal in the stability and control improvement system. This signal is activated by a toggle switch from the gear ratio panel and is activated only when the canards are retracted. The gear ratio panel should have been closed with a special cover and sealed. However, when it was found among the aircraft debris, it was open and the seals were missing. As a result, only 2 of 20 toggle switches were turned on. They connected lateral and longitudinal controllability signals to the aircraft's automatic onboard control system, which in turn improved and corrected the liner stability and controllability. The signal designed to improve lateral controllability characteristics was tested in 1971 and received high ratings from test pilots. However, it was decided not to use it during the demonstration flight at Le Bourget. Due to tight deadlines, there wasn't enough time for its development. The signal designed to correct longitudinal control channel characteristics had never been tested on the Tu-144 at all. To avoid unforeseen situations, during demonstration flights in France, it was decided to disconnect the sensors responsible for activating these signals. But due to a ridiculous error when preparing the aircraft in the workshop, these sensors were turned on, and the gear ratio panel was not closed and sealed. On June 2nd, during demonstration flights, the French supersonic aircraft Concorde performed better than the Soviet Tu-144. The French performed several aerobatic figures and ended the flight very effectively. Concorde landed on the runway, then its engines worked at full power, and it went up like a candle, leaving thousands of spectators in complete delight. Such circumstances upset the Soviet representatives. They held an emergency meeting with the Tu-144 crew, at which they set the task. Tomorrow, June 3rd, the demonstration flight of the Soviet Tu-144 must be more effective than Concorde's flight. The crew was asked to perform a steep climb during the pass over the runway, then retract the canards and end the flight. Such an aerobatic figure was not originally planned for the demonstration flight. Moreover, the crew had not practiced on this aircraft. The commander refused to change the demonstration flight plan. However, he was convinced that this needed to be done. The flight change was reported to Aviation Industry Minister Dementiv. He gave the go-ahead. After deliberating, aircraft commander Mikhail Kozlov and lead engineer Pervukin decided to activate the signal designed to improve lateral controllability characteristics before the flight. If the sensors responsible for activating these signals had been disconnected during aircraft preparation in the workshop, the crew would not have been able to activate them. And if, in addition to this, The gear ratio panel had been closed and sealed. The commander wouldn't have taken this step at all. An hour before the flight, the lead engineer activated the signal, designed to improve lateral controllability characteristics. Simultaneously, the adjacent toggle switch was accidentally activated, which activated the signal designed to correct longitudinal control channel characteristics. This signal had not been developed or tested on this aircraft. Moreover, it was set to maximum value. At 15:19, the Tu-144 took off from Bourget Airport. Turning around, the aircraft retracts its landing gear and begins performing a climb. For engines on afterburner, then the crew begins retracting the canards and levels out. At that second, the signal designed to correct longitudinal control channel characteristics activates. It transmits the maximum signal to the steering unit input. The elevons immediately deflect by 10 degrees. Then negative vertical overload occurs. The pilots seem to hang weightlessly on their straps. Benderov, who is standing and filming the crew's work, is pressed against the ceiling. The Tu-144 enters dive. The pilots try to correct the situation. They pull the control stick toward themselves, but it doesn't help. The commander gives the order to deploy the canards, but by this time the Tu-144, continuing to experience overload, begins breaking apart. Then another detail is revealed, which was classified. The Tu-144 should not have broken apart under such overload. As it turned out, the wing had not been tested for static strength and was not reinforced. Further calculations showed that if the wing had been made and tested in accordance with strength standards, the Tu-144 would have been able to recover from the dive and would have had about 100 meters of clearance above the ground. The Tu-144's commercial service was short-lived. Already in 1978, Aeroflot stopped supersonic passenger flights, and after Brezhnev's death, the government issued a decree to cease work on the Tu-144. They placed their bet on simpler and more reliable Il-86 aircraft. The remaining Tu-144s were used for test flights and cargo transportation. The last flight of the supersonic Tu-144 took place on June 26, 1999. If this investigation into one of aviation's greatest cover-ups fascinated you, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Your engagement helps these important historical truths reach more people. What other aviation mysteries would you like us to uncover? Let us know in the comments below.